welcome. And will you join me in pledge allegiance to the flag?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And Mr. Villalobos, will you make the TV coverage announcement?
Good morning, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. Planning Commission hearings are televised live on County of Santa Barbara Television, CSB TV Channel 20 at 9 a.m. in the South Coast, Lompoc, San Ynez Valley, San Maria, and Orchid areas. Rebroadcast of Planning Commission hearings are on Fridays at 5 p.m. on CSB TV Channel 20. Today's hearing will also be streamed live on the county's website and will be available for download there, as well as the county's YouTube channel. Now for the roll call, Commissioner Brown.
Here.
Commissioner Cooney.
Here.
Commissioner Farini.
Here.
Commissioner Blau.
Here.
And Chair Park.
Here.
Thank you.
And now should we have the agenda status report by Mr. Wilson?
Good morning, Chair Park, members of the Commission. The agenda status report of today is there's one item on the consent agenda and there's one item on the standard agenda, and staff is ready to present on the item on the standard agenda, which is the Santa Barbara Botanic Garden compliance update. Would you like me to move to the projection report?
I would, thank you.
The next meeting was going to be held on February 13th, but that meeting was canceled at our last hearing. Our next scheduled meeting is on February 27th, which is going to be located here in Santa Barbara. There's 3 items projected on that agenda. The NAFI appeal of the Dunn School is going to be returning on that date, as well as 2 items from long-range planning, their progress report, comprehensive progress report, and their 2019 through 2020 work program. The next scheduled time for us to meet would be on March 6th, which is also here in Santa Barbara. There's 3 items agendized for that meeting, and then following that meeting will be in Santa Maria on March 13th, and there are 3 items projected for that date. And then following that, we will return on March 27th in Santa Barbara, and currently there's only 1 item projected for that date. The projection report does indicate that on March 6th, Commissioner Blau will be absent, and then on March 27th, Commissioner Brown will be absent. That's all I have to report at this time.
A couple things.
Yes, Commissioner Brown.
Thank you. On March 13th, as scheduled, it will be, as I project it, an 8-hour day. And not that we aren't capable, very strong and sturdy commission, of an 8-hour day. I think it would it would be better if we could move one of the items to perhaps some other date, because I think it's going to be a very full day with ERG. I think there's going to be a lot of public comment, and I just think that, and probably the cannabis ordinance amendment too. I'm not sure what that is. 2 hours, it's quite a bit. You're going to have some public comment here for that, and I'm wondering if you couldn't consider if the commission would be agreeable to that, to some other date that's perhaps not as busy, perhaps the 27th of March, if you wouldn't consider that, looking at that.
Commissioner Brown,
Sorry.
through the chair.
Sorry to throw a monkey wrench into it here.
No, those are great suggestions. We were whispering madly across the table. There is ability to adjust some of those meetings or some of those items on the March 13th, which could be the last item, which is a request for the county to consider amendment to the cannabis ordinance. It is projected 2 hours. However, I don't think it's going to take that long.
Okay.
So we could move that to either March 27th
Okay.
or possibly March 6th, but we'd have to coordinate to meet the deadlines on that. So,
Okay.
so Commissioner Brown, through the chair, just a clarification on that item. That item on the Watkins Cannabis Ordinance Amendment, it's a request to initiate, and staff is preparing a memo or a staff report on that. So the overall time, the action that's going to be before the Planning Commission on that particular item is to consider whether or not to initiate an ordinance amendment.
Oh, okay. So it'll be certainly less than 2 hours.
That is what we're
Okay.
anticipating to be less than 2
Oh,
hours.
okay. All right.
I have a question.
The other two items could be lengthy.
Yeah, I expect they will.
I think they will. On the Watkins Cannabis Ordinance Amendment, that's completely different from what the board discussed last week and will come to us.
So Chair Park, members of the commission, that is a item that was brought forward from a member of the public requesting an amendment to the ordinance in regards to the use of generators for cannabis operations. So staff is preparing a staff report on that to bring before the commission on whether or not to initiate an ordinance amendment.
And that is, the use of generators is one item that was discussed at the board meeting, wasn't it?
So, Mr. Chair and Commissioners, yes, the board reviewed a number of proposed or possible amendments to the ordinance, and one was the use of generators for security, mainly for security lighting, and the board declined to initiate that. This private proposal goes much further, and it really is about the use of generators for development of cannabis, period. So pumping of wells and lighting facilities and the like.
And when could we estimate when the items the board raised would be coming to us? That
So,
amendment.
Mr. Chair and Commissioners, I believe the estimate we gave the Board of Supervisors is that it would take us 32 weeks to process those amendments. I'm not sure if we're going to come to the commission initially and brief you on what the board requested that we do and get your input and then go off and draft the ordinances, or if we're going to come with the ordinances developed. If it's the first, it'll come soon. I mean, I would think probably late March or early April at the latest. And
I
then,
think that would be a useful process, some kind of, as we've discussed, conceptual
Right.
scoping.
so I would expect that
meeting.
would come in the next
Okay.
month and a half or so.
And does it make sense to coordinate that with this Watkins Cannabis Ordinance Amendment item?
Mr. Chair, I don't recommend that. I think it's really two distinct issues, and I think it might confuse the issues.
Right. Okay, so with all those confusing questions, what are we left with? What we do with this item?
So Chair Park, members of the commission, we will make it a determination looking at the docketing schedule to move that item, the ordinance amendment, to either the March 6th or move it to the March 27th.
Is that something we need to address today here at the commission?
No, staff can take care of that internally.
Great.
Is it possible that we could make the ERG time certain? Or do it first, or just agendize it first, or so the public knows? Because I expect there's going to be a lot of people here. And I don't want to see them waiting all day. We can do it in the afternoon or whatever. Anyway, that's something for you to think about.
I think it is something, and we can address that after the meeting when we prepare the agenda for that.
Right.
I think that's something I'd like to do this year, is have more time certain so that public comment will be easier for the public. But there may be a lot of public comment on the Brooks appeal too. I don't really know. So we'll discuss that, Mr. Wilson. Okay.
So Chair Park, yes, we'll work with you on the agenda as far as identifying time certains for items that are on the agenda. One other item of clarification, at our last meeting, we indicated that there was going to be a joint meeting on March 6th with the Montecito Planning Commission to discuss the work program for short-term rentals. However, that item has been pulled from the projection report, and so that'll be scheduled at a later time. So there won't be a joint meeting on March 6th.
Great. Oh,
And Mr. Chair, just to clarify, the reason we pulled that is we have finite resources in long-range planning, and so we had to make a decision as to what we were going to delay in order to do the work on cannabis, and this just seemed like a natural. So it'll be delayed for some months until we get through the cannabis ordinance update.
well, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, are you done with the projection report? I know we've asked you so many questions. I've gotten lost.
So Chair Park, members of the commission, yes, that concludes the projection report summary.
Okay, do we have any public comment? This can be on any item that's not on the agenda, hopefully related to what our business is. And we have none. Then we'll go on to the Planning Commissioners' informational reports. Do any of our individual commissioners have a report that they'd like to make? And hearing none, let's go on to our director's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioners, so this morning I think I only have yesterday's hearing to report on because I was with you last week. And on yesterday, February 5th, at the Board of Supervisors, there were 2 items on the administrative agenda, the 101 HOV Lane LCP amendment, and the board did accept the suggested modification, which we happen to suggest the Coastal Commission suggest. So they accepted that. So those amendments are nearly complete. They have to go back, and the executive director has to acknowledge our acceptance, but essentially they're complete. And then we reported on the emergency permit for the debris net project. So that was simply a report to the Board of Supervisors. We had one item on the board's departmental agenda, and that was the North Fork Frost Pond appeal of your commission's decision to require a focused EIR for the frost ponds, and the board denied the applicant's appeal and upheld your determination that an EIR is required for that project. So we will be going back to the Board of Supervisors on March 5th with findings articulating that decision, and then presumably commence preparing an EIR, assuming the applicant will fund it. Two other upcoming hearings I just wanted to remind the board, your commission about. The board will be hearing next week in Santa Maria an oil and gas briefing from the department. We did this, I think, December of 2017, so it's an almost annual event. And it's not an action item, it's just a briefing on the status of oil and gas projects, both onshore and related to offshore, as well as kind of a summary of violations and spills that have occurred in the last year. And then on March 12th, thanks to your commission taking action last week on making a recommendation on hoops, we will be going to the Board of Supervisors to begin their hearing process. Maybe begin and end their hearing process, but that will be on March 12th.
Should we establish a betting pool on how many speaker slips will be turned in? I'm sorry. I should.
And that, I think that's all I have to report.
Well,
Unless
thank
there are
you.
Questions?
How long has the hoops ordinance, the hoops issue been in play? A couple years, 3 years, any idea? I'm just sort of curious.
It depends upon how you look at it,
Okay.
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Brown. At least the last, very actively, I would say, was that appeal filed before you arrived, Jeff? After? How long have you been here? At least 3 years, if you measure it from when the Windset Farms appeal was filed. But I think the issue had been discussed years previously.
All right, thank you.
Well, let's go on to the consent agenda. And we have one item on the consent agenda only. Okay. And first, let me ask, do any members of the commission want to move this to the standard agenda? Okay. Then we do have public comment, I believe. Mr. Chitillo,
Mr. Chair,
am I missing something?
why don't you just let me read it into the record?
Oh, yes. Well, I'm really moving this along, aren't I? Please do, Mr. Villalobos.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The following is a hearing on the request of Don Grady, General Services Department, Real Property Division, to consider case number 19 GOV1 for determination that the acquisition of real property conforms with the comprehensive plan of the County of Santa Barbara pursuant to California Government Code Section 65402A.
There you go. Now it's your turn.
Very good. Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. Staff, could you have figure 1 for this item on the screen? I just point to one thing as part of my comments. I'm Mark Chitillo. I'm here on behalf of the Gaviota Coast Conservancy, as well as the Gaviota Coastal Trail Alliance. two organizations that are committed to protecting and expanding public access on the Gaviota Coast. We support the staff determination and wanted to just thank you for doing this, and wanted to share a few words with Planning, General Services, and Parks Department. For planning, we're very appreciative of the citation of Policy 7.1 in the local coastal plan, which requires the defense of public access. That's been a policy that has not been observed as vigorously as we've thought it should have been over the years, but we're appreciative to see it here. So that's helpful. I think it's clear that the findings are appropriate for this determination. The other issues that we have with respect to the coastal plan and the Gaviota Coast Plan in particular, our coastal access to the beach, are the realization of the access that was anticipated in 1985 from the Gerber fees easements that were dedicated as part of the Point Arguello project back then, have yet to be realized. And finally, the completion of the coastal trail, which is referenced in the staff report. That is a coastal trail between Gaviota State Park and Halama County Beach Park. That's one of the main missions of the Gaviota Coastal Trail Alliance, and we appreciate staff's recognition of the significance of this for that purpose. Now, turning to some of the specifics of this particular offer to dedicate for General Services, thank you for working to make this happen. We recognize the restrictions in terms of the gift that limit the use of the 36 acres that the county is considering accepting. The board considered this in closed session a couple of weeks ago. There hasn't been any report out from that, but we think that it's entirely appropriate that the county does accept this property, and we appreciate the Commission's endorsement of that. One of the things that we're receiving a lot of calls on is, well, what's going to happen with the property? The restrictions on the gift prohibit or limit the uses to habitat preservation, coastal access, and so forth. And one of the things that, as a user of this park, I would suggest that the county does look at is relocation of the kiosk. I know that the Parks is going to go through a master plan process, but the relocation of the kiosk from its current location at the very edge of the current park property all the way up to the bend on Halama Road there would then open up one of the main frustrated uses of this area, and that's for surfers that are seeking to access tarantulas. It's down in the lower left-hand corner of the picture here where the bend crosses the road, crosses the railroad tracks, and there's the U-turn there. Historically, the sheriff has ticketed surfers that are parking there and accessing tarantulas. So we're hopeful that we can see the county move swiftly to relocate the kiosk up to higher up on the road, so that then we won't have the concerns about private use of that, or at least to have the county agree that Parks Department agree that surfers and other coastal access users can park on the side of the road in the newly dedicated areas in order to be able to enjoy the coast. So thank you very much again for your consideration of this issue, and we look forward to moving forward with this process.
Thank you, Mr. Chitillo. If there's no other public comment, do we have a motion for the consent agenda? I'll make it myself. I move that the consent agenda be adopted, be approved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Sorry, so since we have two commissioners up in North County, we have to do roll call.
We do?
Yeah.
All right, well,
So-
let's do it. Thank
All
you.
right. Commissioner Brown.
Aye.
Commissioner Cooney.
Aye.
Commissioner Farini.
Aye.
Commissioner Blau.
Aye.
And Chair Park.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
Thank you. Well, let's move on to our standard agenda. Will you read the first item into the record, Mr. Villalobos?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair.
And then I have a comment immediately thereafter.
The Planning Commission will receive a compliance report for the Santa Barbara Botanic Garden Vital Mission Plan.
Okay. I am a member of the Board of Trustees of the Santa Barbara Botanic Garden, so I'm going to need to recuse myself. And Commissioner Brown, as Vice Chair, will handle the rest of the meeting. Thank you.
Would you like? Yeah, hold on, let me just, I've got a lot of paperwork to do. Can we just take a 1-minute break? Thank you. All my stuff here. Because I can't do his stuff and my stuff. Good morning. I'd like to do ex parte before we begin. North County Planning Commissioners, any ex parte?
We're good to go. Thank you.
So you have no ex parte?
Right.
Okay,
Correct.
good. All right, thank you. Commissioner Cooney? No? Okay. I am a member of the garden, and I've, for many years, have visited frequently, mostly for its plant sales, but for other, just to wander around. So I'm pretty familiar with where it is and what occurs there. Thank you. Okay, Ms. Liu, good morning.
Good morning, Chair, members of the Commission. I am presenting the Botanic Garden Compliance Update. The current conditional use permit and development plan for the Santa Barbara Botanic Garden were approved in 2010, and construction began in 2013. Condition 97 of the permit approved in 2010 requires that your commission be provided with a compliance update 5 years from the start of construction, so that's what we are providing today. So I'll briefly go through conditions related to compliance during construction activities and then also long-term conditions. During construction activities, there was ongoing monitoring by an Environmental Quality Assurance Program Monitor, or EQAP monitor, who prepared weekly compliance reports and addressed any issues that arose during construction. There was also monitoring by permit compliance staff. And then in terms of complaints received in the last 5 years, as noted in staff's memo, there was one formal complaint and one informal complaint that were received by permit compliance staff, who then took steps to address those complaints. Regarding long-term compliance, the garden submitted annual reports to planning and development permit compliance staff since 2012. And in association with this reporting, they also provided a summary report for 2012 through 2017, which is attached to the memo that staff prepared. And as discussed in the memo, with the exception of a few minor items, the garden has operated in compliance with the required conditions. Specifically, a solid waste management plan was developed and has been implemented. Noise monitoring has been conducted, and noise levels have not exceeded 65 decibels during special events. The garden has complied with parking requirements, and water quality maintenance features have been maintained. The garden has complied with attendance limitations, including any one-time limits, special event caps, annual caps, and class attendance limits. And then regarding fire protection, the fire protection plan has been completed and complied with. Weather monitoring has been conducted, and the garden has closed as required during red flag days or during other adverse weather conditions as required by the project conditions. Finally, cultural training materials have been completed and distributed, and an interpretive program has been prepared. That will conclude staff presentation. There's no action required by your commission today, but I am available for questions along with Eric Graham, our permit compliance officer, and Steve Windager, the executive director of the garden, is here to answer questions as well.
Any questions from any commission members? Commissioner Cooney.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a letter that was submitted by Mr. Chatello on behalf of the Friends of Mission Canyon, which raises a few points. I don't know, Ms. Liu, if you've had a chance to look through those and wish to address them, or whether we should turn to the Botanic Garden to answer those questions. But I think they are good ones and concerns of neighbors of the garden, so we should at some point address those.
Chair Brown and Commissioner Cooney, I do have responses for each of those items. Would you like me to address each of them, or kind of go over the high points and then see if you have questions?
I think that's a good idea, just so we touch on them initially, and we can go in further if we have further questions.
Okay. So a couple items. So with regard, and also you may have received a letter from the Botanic Garden in response to Mr. Chatello's letter as well. So starting with, there are some comments made with regard to Condition 31 and compliance with Condition 31, which has to do with special events and whether shuttle buses were used. And as noted in the letter provided by the garden, there are two categories of events. There's community events and there's special events. And shuttle buses have been used as required in compliance with Condition 31, which requires shuttle buses for events of 80 or more people held during the high fire season. And that condition does not apply to community events, which I believe is what was mentioned in Mr. Chatello's letter. Mr. Chatello brings up a question about whether or not there was a noticed meeting to review the fire protection plan. And there was a notice meeting. We have a copy of the notice and confirmation that that meeting was held. Mr. Chatello brought up a concern about lighting and whether lighting has been appropriately upgraded throughout the property. The lighting condition requires upgrading of lighting so that it is compliant with dark sky provisions, but it doesn't require that all of that happen immediately. So for all development that has taken place at the garden up to this point, that condition has been complied with. And as the garden is broken into multiple phases of development. As they move forward with those additional phases of the development, they will be upgrading the lighting as required by that condition. And then regarding complaints related to parking on Mission Canyon Road, permit compliance staff hasn't received any formal complaints in the last 5 years related to those parking situations, and I think permit compliance staff or Mr. Windacre could speak to this more, but we haven't received complaints, and we haven't had situations where compliance staff has observed a violation of that condition. So that will conclude my comments, and I'm happy to answer any more questions.
You have any other further questions?
That's it for now,
Okay,
and
for now.
I appreciate the summary.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms.
Okay.
Liu.
Dr. Windhager, would you like to have any comments? And then I'll open it up for public comment.
I'm happy to answer any specific questions you have. We have been in compliance with our conditional use permit. That still does allow that on busy days, as the day that was referenced by Mr. Chatello, which was the day after a special event. That you will occasionally on a busy spring day have more cars, people parking on the street, and we still would not have reached our conditional use permit limits of 255 people in the spring, but we will have people that will park on Mission Canyon Road. There is some legal parking on Mission Canyon Road, and there's a fog line, so if you park outside of the fog line, you are legal. And if you park with a wheel over, it's illegal. I don't know what the garden can necessarily do to address that situation, because we are not we don't have any authority on the roadway. It is not necessarily our ability to ticket or tow anyone that's on that roadway that is parked illegally. So we do, for special events, as in compliance with our CUP, we do have, when we know that there's going to be additional parking needed, we do have shuttle buses available. But for general busy spring days, as the day that was pictured in the photo that was sent by Mr. Patillo, we do not have shuttles available just throughout the spring. It's hard to tell when you're going to have the weather conditions that would warrant having the extra parking available.
So could I ask, on a busy spring day, as you describe it, appears to fall between the parking lot capacity and the shuttle buses being used. The reason cars would park out on the road is because there's no parking in the parking lots?
There might be there could be a time period when you have a lot of people coming and going, and so they wouldn't find parking in our main parking lot, and so that would be why someone would usually park on the road. There are at least 10 legal spots where there's our original parking lot was actually alongside Mission Canyon Road back in the 1930s, and so that parking area for about 10 cars still remains, and so people will park there, and then once those also get filled up, then you start seeing people park. We do put out cones so that we sort of clearly demarcate. We also then get complaints from our neighbors about the fact that we put out cones because they don't look very attractive, and I'm not even sure we have the legal ability to cone off a roadway, but we do. We've talked to the county road staff about the potential to put up no parking signs, and I still would love to do that, but as of right now, that has not been something the county road staff has been interested in us pursuing.
Well, I think my feeling is whatever you can do to make the area safe for visitors to the museum is going to take priority, and I think it's a good idea to continue to solicit the county's cooperation before someone runs across the street and is not seen by an approaching driver and we have a severe injury. So, we wouldn't want to mar the good reputation you're working every day to protect by a single inadvertent accident.
Well, the good news is that where the crosswalk is the road's pretty pulled back and there is legal parking there. So we don't think that the challenges we've had have been significantly down from the main part of the Botanic Garden where we didn't put cones, or significantly uphill. Mm-hmm. But we will take every effort to try to make sure that we get that back right.
Thank you.
I have a question for you. So, having been to the garden with some frequency, I've always wondered why you didn't look at or consider restriping your parking lot. I think you could squeeze out a few more spaces if you rejiggered some things. It's particularly at the southern end where you've got this hatch mark, and I'm not sure what that's for, but it seems to me people could parallel park. I don't know. I just wondered if you'd ever considered that to see whether or not you could maybe squeeze out a few more spaces there.
We did just restripe our parking lot. We kept the same number of spaces, but we did make that hatched area down the bottom is for bus parking, but it was it's not used on the weekends for bus parking.
Right.
So we have sort of demarcated it in such a way that when we have parking attendants, we will guide excess cars into that area.
Okay.
We do have parking attendants in the garden whenever we expect to have over 70 people, and that's oftentimes throughout the spring.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Okay, now we'll move on to public comment. Our first speaker is Richard Stein.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I live at 2252 Las Canoas Road, which is directly east of the Pritzloff Center. And I'm at approximately the same elevation as that facility. Mm-hmm. I'm really concerned about the extension of the event hours. As it is now, when there are visitors at that location, I can hear their conversations very much like we're speaking now, because the sound travels just directly across the canyon. There's a small drainage between this facility and our home. having it extended beyond sunset is very disturbing to myself and my neighbors in that area. Just last year during the fiesta, there was an event at this facility, and we had guests over, and it was very difficult for us to be outside because of the noise. I'm also concerned about the in their document it says in low fire periods of the year. All of us have to be aware that there's no such thing as a low fire period in Santa Barbara. It's a year-round event. In another life, I'm a member of the Santa Barbara County Search and Rescue Team, and I'm involved with evacuations for the fires that have occurred, and I've been in areas where people have trying to get out of the area, and it's very alarming and very dangerous for the residents in Santa Barbara or in the Mission Canyon area to be able to get out of that area if there's additional traffic at the Botanic Gardens. Last year during a red flag event in that area, the Botanic Gardens was actually open, and I went to Fire Station 15 and just to inform them that was occurring, and then they went up and informed them that they weren't complying. Increasing the number of events will also affect my neighborhood, and so I hope that you take this in consideration with your decision. Thank you.
Our next speaker is
Chair Brown, members of the commission. Just a point of clarification. The item before you today is just receive and file a compliance report, so there's no action before you today in regards to some of the comments we've heard today. So there is an item projected at a later date that may address some of these items that are being brought before you.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. I was going to make that comment afterwards, that if neighbors have these concerns, we would like to hear from you at that time. That would be the appropriate time to come and make your comments when the CUP and DVP is up for revision. So, okay, but thank you for coming today. So our next speaker is Mariah Upton.
It's Maya, but I'll happily speak at the next.
Well, you're certainly welcome to speak today if you.
I think what I have to say is
okay. Fine. All right. Thank you for coming. And our last speaker is Mark Shatillo.
Good morning again, Madam Chair,
morning.
members of the Commission. I'm Mark Shatillo here on behalf of the Friends of Mission Canyon. And I'd like to ask your indulgence to use a little bit more time because we have a number of issues to address here. I'll try and be as succinct as I can.
And how long do you think you'll take?
7 minutes is my guess.
We certainly don't want to rush through our hearing today because we don't want to have it a first. We want to make sure.
You mean where you
yes.
you conclude before 10 o'clock?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I'll do my best. So I'm here on behalf of the Friends of Mission Canyon. It's a community organization that's concerned with a number of issues throughout Mission Canyon, but our principal concern with respect to the activities of our neighbor, the Botanic Garden, is public safety. We support the garden. We're members of the garden. We support Steve, but we also have concerns about ensuring the safety of the community. And the conditional use permit that was approved in 2010 really represented a compromise. It is a package of measures that was, in the board's judgment, the best way to allow the garden to fulfill its mission and take reasonable steps to protect the community. And so we appreciate that, and we appreciate the partnership with the Botanic Garden. I'm going to address a handful of different things, and in some ways, really, this is these are comments for Steve, and Steve's been open to meet with us, and we're looking forward to continuing that conversation. But as we've tried to track this. I think there's a couple of overarching comments. One is a request for additional transparency in the availability of documents, and this is really something that the county and the garden could facilitate posting all of the relevant plans. I was surprised to get the fire protection plan that I have a copy from 2008, 2009, but apparently there had been an update. There was a hearing in 2010, and then the revised plan in 2013. I think the fire protection plan and the evacuation plan, the transportation, parking, and management plan, and the garden's procedures for emergency preparedness and evacuation all should be posted on the web. All should be available for the public, either through the county website or through the garden's website, or both, and that there be an opportunity for periodic updates to those plans, because conditions are changing, and one of our biggest concern is evacuation in the event of a fire, and so enhanced transparency and community engagement are the two themes that I have, I think, throughout the presentation. The second topic is the enforcement and the ability to track the at-any-time caps. That was a core issue that the board settled on in giving the best possible protection to the community, and in particular, there's been a lot of difficulties with the turnstiles. The condition itself requires the handing out of cards, and I guess that's been dispensed with, but that's a literal requirement of the conditions, at least until the turnstiles are working. It doesn't appear the turnstiles are working. I'm glad that there is a new system coming in. I'm not going to fuss or complain about past practices, but we very much do look forward to the new infrared system and more robust reporting. The annual reporting process that we get is something we look at carefully, and the 3 buckets per day in terms of public use is a crude tool for being able to determine whether the at any time cap is being met or not at any given moment. And that's at any time. That's the language in the condition, and that's what we think that the system needs to be calibrated, and the reporting needs to be such that there's a determination as to whether or not those caps are being exceeded at any given time, in particular during the community events. My letter did misspeak in referencing the shuttle bus requirement, but clearly the conditions require the at-any-time caps be met during special events and community events. Those are the ones where we're having a lot of volume, and that's where the neighbors and the folks on Mission Canyon Road have observed problems with the garden, with the parking on the road, across the fog line, and with a lot of activity, a lot of people driving up the canyon and then turning around. It's a dead end, coming back down, parking informally on other people's property, walking, and it's a curvy road, so having people walking in the road when it can be problematic, because people are also trying to drive in that same area. The third issue is that of transportation and circulation. It was a little disturbing. That photograph was taken showing cars out in the roadway, and the permit itself clearly requires that there be no parking in the road. And so the garden's response to our letter stated that they can't enforce that. So there's an issue. I guess what the expectation is that we should be contacting the sheriff. I personally would rather that we be able to just have this enforced, and it's clear people who are parking there are going to the garden, and so while signage may help, but and the cones are helpful in informing or advising people as to where they should be, clearly it's not working at all the time. And in particular, it's during these peak capacity moments, those spring days when there's high visitation. That's when we're experiencing problems. And so I think it is incumbent upon the board, or upon the garden to enforce that provision, take whatever steps they can to accomplish that. And then the last issue is the same practical effect finding. It's inherent in the fire protection plan, but it was a recognition that in order for the board and the county to make the general plan findings of consistency for this project, which did not have what is required of an institution in an area like this, is 2 access ways. to access, ingress, egress. Could not do that because we're in a box canyon. So the convention that was used was same practical effect, and the garden identified a series of additional measures that were undertaken in order to ostensibly provide the same practical effect as having a second access way. Now, some of those measures have not been fully implemented. For example, the turnaround in the garden parking lot, which was initially for fire equipment, but also provides the benefit of when you do have traffic coming up and the garden is closed or the parking lot is full, rather than having cars come up. And the problem is when the parking lot is full and people want to go into the garden, there's nowhere for those cars to go. They just have to stack on Mission Canyon Road, and they block the lane. So absent a pocket turn lane or something like that, having what was originally part of the design, the operational plan and the physical plan for the garden's facilities, there would be a turnaround at the south end of their parking lot that would allow fire trucks to be able to make a 360 and then continue up to where the gain house used to be, and allow cars to turn around and go back down. So that's part of what we expected would be part of this same practical effect that has not been realized and is troubling.
1 minute, Mr. Sotelo.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The other component are the changed circumstances. As climate change is having a greater effect, we're seeing more ferocious fires, bigger winds, less periods of wet fuel conditions. So we think it's going to be appropriate that the garden and the county revisit some of these conditions. Clearly, the fire season dates are no longer good. We had 2 big fires within 4 or 5 days of the cutoffs between the low and high fire season, and those dates are just going to spread out further. So we'd ask that the county look at some means of reevaluating the changed circumstances as it evaluates whether compliance with these conditions are going to continue to have the same practical effect. Okay. We'll have a chance to look at that.
Would you please conclude?
So thank you, Madam Chair. You know, our concerns, we do appreciate the relationship with the garden, and we want to continue to work, but we do want to make sure that we do have no degradation of public safety in the canyon. Okay. And so from the garden's operations.
Okay. Thank you for your comments. So we're just here to get the update. Dr. Winhager, I don't know if you want to come back. We're going to see you in a month, but you're certainly welcome to.
If I could just
sure.
Mention about the red flag conditions and sure. the fire issues. There's some confusion in the county that when somewhere in the county has a red flag, it does not mean that everywhere in the county is under a red flag. The garden is in what's called CAZ 239. That is the zone that also covers all of downtown Santa Barbara. And we have closed whenever we are in a red flag in that zone. If there's a red flag called for the mountains, it oftentimes does not apply to us, and so the garden would still stay open. And the time that was mentioned by one of the other speakers, that was actually a red flag that was called for the mountains, not for our zone. The other thing is, I think I completely agree with Mr. Sotelo. We can have a fire, as evidenced by the Thomas Fire, any time of the year. But what is the single most important mitigation condition that the garden is operating under is that we close under red flag conditions. So the times when you would have the rapid spread of fire, which is low humidities and high winds, the garden is closed to the public. And that means that under those circumstances, not that you couldn't have a fire when there's not a red flag. We frequently have fires that start, but they don't spread rapidly. And so you don't have the widespread need for rapid evacuation. I think that that's the key thing that is already in place and that the garden is committed to keeping in place.
Thank you. And we look forward to seeing you on next month. Staff, any concluding comments?
Chair Brown, I just wanted to reiterate just a couple of things. As Mark Sotelo mentioned, for the tracking, instead of the turnstiles for tracking the number of attendees, the garden is in the process of instituting a new system that Mr. Sotelo actually helped bring to the garden's attention. And then I wanted to also mention, with regard to the turnaround that the large vehicle turnaround that Mr. Sotelo is referring to, that is intended to be installed as a part of phase 2 of garden development, which is why it has not been installed as of now. And
Okay.
that concludes my
Okay, great.
comments.
Thank you. Any other final comments, questions from the commission? Commissioner Cooney.
This is a procedural matter, Madam Chair. We did receive a letter just within the last day from Lorna Moore. It exceeds one page in length, and I'd like to move that we accept that letter into our record.
Okay, I'll second that. Go ahead.
Commissioner Cooney,
Aye.
Commissioner Farini,
Aye.
Commissioner Blau,
Normally I would say no, but in this case, we're not making any decisions, so plenty of time to analyze the letter until we actually are modifying the, well, I'll vote aye.
Chair Brown.
Aye.
Motion passes 4-0.
Okay, so I think that concludes our business for the day, unless staff has something additional. For us.
no,
Sorry.
I have a comment.
Okay.
I'd like to see staff get together with Public Works or the Sheriff's Department and solve the problem of people parking illegally on the road if it's creating a hazard. I mean, I'm thinking that the county could simply post the property saying that park in the street or across the fog line, you're subject to be towed away. And it's pretty simple to get a towing company on contract with the county, and they'd be happy to tow those cars away and then make a lot of money. But I really don't think it should be the position of the gardens to enforce the traffic laws. In fact, they can't enforce the traffic laws. It takes a traffic officer to do that. But I do think there may be some requirements where the county does the posting. I know in my private property in subdivisions or in shopping centers, if I don't post the property to say that it's, for patrons only and somebody to tow away, I can't tow them away. But if I post them and that sign there, all I have to do is call the tow company. They come up, pick up the car, and take it away. Those are my comments, and I just hope that we don't run into that issue when we actually hear this thing again and create a problem for the gardens.
Okay. Thank you. Anything else? Commissioner Cooney.
Madam Chair, just a comment. This is a facility in the 1st District of great value to the community. It is impossible, I think, to be perfect all the time, and we're grateful for the fact that the Friends of Mission Canyon are keeping an eye on it, as are the immediate neighbors, so that the word can get back to us, and if we need to make a change, we're going to be well informed about that. But I also want to say that given the conditions that we as a county have imposed on the gardens operation, based primarily on the fact that it's located where it is, a beautiful location, but also a dangerous location. Those conditions have largely been complied with, and at the instance of the garden in most cases, without being prompted to do so. So we should look at it, I think, with a positive view, trying to make our oversight even more effective in the future. But that's not to say we aren't pleased with the overall operation up to this point.
Thank you. And just my concluding remarks, I just want to thank Dr. Windhager and his staff for their very fine stewardship. It's certainly a lot different than when we heard this item in 2010. So it's good, and we look forward to seeing you back on the March 6th and look forward to the public returning for comment. So thank you for the hearing, and we'll see you at the end of the month. Our meeting's concluded. Thank you.